Bad Genius is a Thai film that is said to be inspired by the real-life incident of an attempt to cheat on the SAT or Scholastic Aptitude Test, a prestigious test taken by students from all over the world to get into the best universities in the US. Lynn was a student prodigy with perfect grades, winning many academic and non-academic competitions in junior high school. Then her father enrolled her in a prestigious school in Thailand where most students were wealthy, while Lynn was a child from a middle-class family. Her father was only a teacher at his old school. Her father insisted that Lynn must go to that school. Negotiations occurred between the headmaster and Lynn's father. At first, Lynn had to pay the tuition fee per semester. However, because of her genius, Lynn eventually got a full scholarship from her school and free meals. And finally, Lynn officially became a student at the school. At the new student photo shoot, she met Grace, who was beautiful but no more intelligent than Lynn. They became best friends. While in the library, Grace told Lynn that their school had a new rule. You must have a GPA above 3.2 to be promoted to the next grade. Because Grace felt she wouldn't get that score, she persuaded Lynn to teach her. Lynn agreed to teach Grace after finding out that their teacher has been leaking questions in private tutoring sessions. The midterm examination came. When she looked at the paper, Lynn felt the questions were the same as the ones she had taught Grace. But Grace couldn't remember what she had learned because she was stupid. After finishing the question, Lynn copied the answers into the eraser and started the action. Here, the eraser with the answers to the final exam was very carefully placed in her shoe. Lynn passed the shoe backward. It was good that Grace could catch Lynn's shoe without getting caught. But when Grace tried to return the shoe to Lynn, she miscalculated and lost her way. Because Lynn was a genius, she took the shoe. She told the supervisor that she hadn't written her name so the supervisor wouldn't suspect anything. The first mission was a success and Grace scored 3.87, while Lynn scored a perfect 4.0. Grace took Lynn swimming to Pat's house to celebrate Grace's score. Pat was Grace's friend and classmate, but Lynn and Pat rarely spoke. It was the first time they talked. Pat hinted at the eraser that contained the puncture until the secret deal was finally made. Pat offered to pay Lynn $1.2 million a lesson if Lynn would give Pat a cheat sheet. He also had 5 friends willing to pay him. If you added all the subjects in one semester, Lynn would get $96 million. Pat called it T-money. When Lynn got home, she opened the drawer and found the receipt for the $82 million new student fee and her parents' divorce certificate. Lynn became sad and then expressed sadness by playing the piano and singing the birthday song. She was sad. After all, she remembered that yesterday was her mother's birthday. Here we learned that her father's purpose in sending Lynn to the school was to pursue an overseas scholarship, which was often held at the school. Although Lynn didn't want to go to school there, she had an idea while playing the piano. The next day, Grace, Pat, and their 5 friends came to Lynn's house under the pretext of taking piano lessons. But here they were talking about cheating strategies by playing the piano with classical music, rhythms marked with fingers, because each melody had different finger movements. Lynn used these finger movements to code the answers A, B, C, and D. They also memorized Lynn's finger movements. When the exam came, their mission went smoothly. Pat, Grace, and their friends got good marks, and Lynn was well paid for the illegal business. She bought expensive clothes for her father, and Lynn's father knew that Lynn had become rich by giving piano lessons. Since the mission's success, there has been a lot of interest in secret piano lessons. In the 2013 school year, they moved up to grade 11. Not only did they move up, but Lynn and Bank were awarded scholarships, and their names were displayed on a giant banner in the school. Bank was Lynn's rival at school, and they were both the brightest students. They also participated in the Teen Genius Olympics, where they won a prize of $5 million before tax. They were able to answer question after question. Even tricky questions could be answered, so their school won the Olympics and made the headmaster proud. After winning the Olympics, the headmaster called Lynn and Bank, who offered them a scholarship for 9 semesters in Singapore. Still, unfortunately, the scholarship was only for one person. Lin and Bank felt challenged to get the scholarship. When Bank came home, his mother, who had opened a laundry business called Little Bank Laundry, found the washing machine was broken, so their mother had to wash clothes by hand. Bank replaced his mother in doing the laundry. Tong met Bank and said he felt he had missed the material because he had been ill. With the exam coming up soon, Tong was afraid he wouldn't be able to catch up with the material, so Tong tried to persuade Bank to give him a cheat sheet. He blurted out that the piano code was too complex for her. Fortunately, Bank was not suspicious. Finally, Tong used money to persuade him, but Bank still refused. The exam arrived. Bank was the first to enter the room, followed by the other students. Unfortunately, exam number 40 had 2 sets of questions. Each student would get a different type. After the exam, Bank told Lin that Tong was looking at her answer sheet, but Lin did not care. Not only that, but Bank also complained to the exam supervisor, but the supervisor did not care. In the last 30 minutes, Lin started to act. Lin managed to get set 1, and her friends left. Because Lin got set 1, she swapped Tong's question and answer sheet because Tong got appointed 2. For the last 20 minutes, Lin worked on set 2 and only came out for the previous 5 minutes. The situation was agitated as the race against time for the codes began. Lin had not yet had time to exchange the question paper with Tong, but the supervisor had already taken it. Lin took a break with Pat and Grace. The invigilator reprimanded Lin. She thought she'd been caught, but the invigilator only told her to write her name down because Lin hadn't written it down before. Before she could take her paper, Lin and Tong were called to the principal's office. When they arrived, it turned out that Bank had reported Tong's cheating to the headmaster. Tong and Lin were caught. Lin's father was called to the principal's office and complained about the affair. They were questioned by the headmaster and threatened with expulsion. But before Lin could answer the headmaster's questions, Bank said that Lin was doing all this for money. Fortunately, Lin was not expelled, but her scholarship was withdrawn, and the principal told her that school was a place to learn, not make money. Lin denied this because she remembered the receipt for the 82 million new student fees, a bribe or tea money. They defended their points, almost leading to an altercation between the outstanding student and the headmaster. Lin's father settled the dispute, and it was good that Lin's scholarship was not withdrawn. But there was one condition. She couldn't apply for the Singapore scholarship. The one who got the scholarship was Bank. Lin was furious. When Lin got home, all her lies about the piano lessons were exposed. Lin's father didn't want to wear the clothes from the shop and asked Lin to give the money from her savings back to her friends. Lin was sad and cried. In the last year of grade 12, Grace and Lin met in a restaurant. Grace told Lin about her meeting with Pat's parents. Pat's parents, who had just returned from France, thanked Grace because they thought Pat's grades were good because of Grace and asked Grace to accompany him to the STIC exam, and his parents would pay all expenses. Pat's father studied at the same place as her. So, Grace asked Lin to help with her exam. It was a test that was taken all over the world at the same time. So, the test was truly international. At first, Lin refused because she was traumatized by the previous incident. But Grace pleaded with Lin and said Pat would pay $247 million for a test. Grace gave her the book, the leaflet, and the stick, and they went home. Halfway through, Lin hesitated to take the job. She was indecisive. First, Lin wanted to return the book to Pat's flat and said she couldn't help this time. While waiting for the receptionist to finish her call, she saw a foreigner on a video call with his son, and Lin saw the time difference between the two countries. Looking at the clock in Sydney, she thought of a way to help Grace and Pat with their international exams. The next day, Lin worked out a strategy with Grace and Pat. Lin took advantage of the different time zones as the STIC was held worldwide, so Sydney, Australia, would take the exam first. Thailand and Australia were 4 hours apart, so Lin would fly to Australia and give her answers to Thailand. And the crazy thing was, Lin would sell the answers she got in Sydney to people in Thailand. So Lin would make a lot of money on this deal. The people in Thailand just have to wait for Lin's answers. The trick was that Lin has to remember the answers and send them by mobile phone. Because there were so many questions, Lin needed another person, but Lin said he won't help. That person was Banks. The scene changed. The bank, who had just returned from delivering laundry, was suddenly approached by two people. According to them, Bank had just hit their car and smashed the mirror and didn't want to take responsibility. Eventually, Bank was beaten unconscious. When Bank woke up, he was already at the rubbish dump, even though he had a scholarship test to Singapore at 8 a.m. that day. Bank tried to catch up with him. Elsewhere, Tong, Pat, Grace, and Lynn discussed the price of Stick's answers and recruiting 30 clients because more than 30 would be risky, and less would not be worth the pay. Tong, who happened to have a Stick group, offered Lynn because there were exactly 30 people. Pat told Tong not to tell anyone about his business, let alone Bank. Strangely enough, Tong knew that a disaster had hit the bank and couldn't take the scholarship exam. Lynn was saddened to hear this. Pat set up a group of Stick participants to buy answers from Lynn under the guise of a seminar they called Good at Learning. In it, Pat explained the process of providing answer keys through the pencils. The pencils had barcodes of different thicknesses, so the thick ones were for answer A, the slightly thick ones for option B, the thin ones for option C, and the fragile ones for option D. And it would be next to the barcodes for the questions, so that each pencil stores the answer key in each session. The discussion was concluded, and the participants were informed that they would leave the meeting point by motorbike taxi before Ozo 7:30 to avoid being late. Bank was recovering, although he had a slight bruise on his eye. Lynn came to see them and discussed her intention to invite Bank to join the Stick project. Bank didn't want to at first because he didn't want to be part of the fraud, but Lynn's words struck a chord with Bank. Lynn said, "You are not cheating, but look at this life that is cheating you." Lynn then gave the bank an address. Bank finally came to. Lynn explained her plans for Sydney to Bank. Then, they both filled in the necessary forms for Stick, but Lynn was missing something. Lynn used the teenage genius as an organizer in Sydney. She used her father's account to apply for a visa, claiming to be traveling with Banks and accompanied by some teachers. The paperwork was done. Finally, they did a simulation of the sessions so they would know what to do in each session, because one session was so fast that they couldn't leave when it was over unless they were sick. The simulation went well. It was time to talk about money. Bank would get a share of $401 million from their actions, and Lynn would reach $822 million. Finally, they were determined to start the movement. They were due to leave for Sydney at 11 o'clock, but Lynn asked Grace, Pat, and Banks to meet at 1 o'clock because there was something to prepare. They finally met, and it turned out that they were talking about the worst that could happen if Lynn and Banks' stunt failed. Pat blurted out about Banks waking up in a rubbish dump after being beaten up. Bank gets angry because he never told anyone that he woke up in a rubbish dump, and here we also know that the mastermind behind the beating is Pat. Because of Pat, Bank doesn't get the scholarship, and he wants to cancel all the plans he's carefully made. Pat apologizes to Bank and throws away his pride by pleading with Bank for his future, but fails. Lynn finally finds out that Pat is the main culprit, and is also disappointed that Pat hugged an innocent person just for the sake of the exam. Lynn eventually catches up with Bank, but Grace tries to persuade Lynn to forgive Pat. Bank, who was going to back out, didn't because he saw an advert about the future of laundry and decided to go anyway. Lynn, who was going to back out when she met Bank and knew that Bank would go anyway, didn't back out either. They both went on their way, forgetting about the beating. They arrived in Sydney. They were both trying to come to terms with the problems in Thailand. It was time for the action to begin. Lynn and Banks hid their mobile phones in their respective toilets. The first session was over. During the break, the participants were given 10 minutes to type the answers on their mobile phones and send them to the other groups. Meanwhile, Pat and Grace were at the Honest Printer in Thailand, waiting for their solutions. The participants had also gathered with the motorbike taxi drivers at the meeting point. Lynn had given her answer to the group, while Banks had asked for an extra half fee to compensate for his beating, and he said he would send the response when they had transferred. Pat was upset, but there was no alternative but to do what the bank wanted. After the transfer, the bank finally sent the answers. After receiving all the answers for the first session, Pat and Grace printed the barcodes on the pens according to the solution sent, and before they knew it, Lynn's dad was on the phone. After completing the questions in session 2, they moved straight to session 3. Time was running out, and they managed to remember all the answers. When they went to the men's room, there was no problem as there was no queue. But in the ladies' room, Lynn had a problem because someone was in the toilet where she had put her mobile phone. The line was also very long. While Bank was typing his reply, someone banged on his toilet door. It turned out to be one of the stick examiners who had received a report that Bank had been in the toilet too long. However, Bank wrote all the answers for sessions 2 and 3, but because he was too nervous, he dropped his mobile phone and was caught. On the other hand, Lynn, who had just entered the toilet, had run out of time and was asked by the supervisor to leave immediately, so she hid her mobile phone in her shoe. When she came out of the toilet, she saw Bank being questioned by the supervisor. When Lynn tried to go back to class, there was a body check, and then she saw the gallon and hid her phone in the gallon of water while pretending to drink. The 4th exam session started without Bank's help, so Lynn had to do all the answers independently. At first, Lynn struggled until she broke out in a cold sweat. Still, eventually, she managed to memorize all the solutions using her piano method. During the last session, she tried to put a pencil in her mouth to make Lynn vomit and was allowed to leave by the invigilator. Lynn's father kept trying to contact her, but Pat and Grace didn't notice because they were both busy. Lynn's father went to the print shop to meet Lynn in person. Meanwhile, at the rendezvous point, the motorcycle taxi drivers and the participants started getting upset as time ran out. Lynn's father questioned Pat and Grace. During the interrogation, Lynn sent the answer key to the line group. Ultimately, Grace was forced to lie to Lynn's father and tell him she was going to Sydney. Lynn's father believed her and left. The problems at the meeting point weren't over yet, so Pat reassured everyone that the plan wouldn't fail. The participants became quiet when Lynn sent the answer key to the group line. Meanwhile, back in Sydney, Lynn was being chased by the invigilator. She dashed while sending all the answers to the group line. Lynn escaped to the station but didn't catch the train, and her phone fell and broke. She walked on, but it turned out to be a dead end. She saw a vending machine and bought milk and food to induce vomiting. Eventually, he found Lynn. Lynn pretended to vomit to make them think she was sick, and they took her to the testing center. By this time, all the preparations had been made in Thailand, and they were off to their respective exam venues. Lynn, who saw Bank, felt sorry for him and asked the Thai embassy representative about his condition. It turned out that Bank admitted that he had his mobile phone, and Lynn deleted their photos. Lynn eventually returned to Thailand. She was met at the airport by Pat and Grace. They also invited Lynn to a party at Pat's house to celebrate her success. However, Lynn was upset and angry that Bank had been caught and Lynn had been disqualified. Lynn didn't want to spoil her friends by giving them cheats all the time because, at university, Lynn wouldn't be able to provide them with exam answers. Her father picked Lynn up. Her father was angry because all he knew was that Lynn had gone to Sydney on a date. Because she was so upset about what had happened in Sydney, Lynn finally confessed to her father what she had done. After all that had happened, Lynn applied to be a teacher and was interviewed. She was honest about what she had done. Meanwhile, Pat and his friends had a party at Pat's house to celebrate her passing the stick test with a score of 1460. Because Lynn was disappointed in her actions, she took no notice and eventually left the line group. Meanwhile, Bank was expelled from school because the embassy released him. After the interview, Bank contacted Lynn and asked her to come home. It turned out that Bank's house had changed. Bank bought a new motorbike and washing machine and upgraded his laundry furniture. Bank and Lynn meet. They discuss their future together. Bank has asked Lynn to continue her work on the GAT-PAT University entrance exam as it was less risky and more in demand. Bank had calculated that she would earn $4.1 billion from this work. Bank dared to do all this because the risk was not prison. Lynn still refused Bank's invitation and wanted to leave, but Bank threatened to report that Lynn was involved in the stick scandal. Lynn was not afraid, but that wasn't all. Bank also threatened to report everyone involved in a stick to the relevant institutions. Bank warned that Lynn's name would be wrong and her father would be disappointed. Lynn was silent, but Lynn really wanted to repent and refused Banks' invitation anyway. Lynn decided to come clean. She then told her father that she had made her choice, tearfully confessing to her father, who comforted her and helped her redeem herself by submitting a formal confession to the STIC organization. So, what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below, and if you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you in the next video.